Okay, let's get things started. So once again, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to the first topDNS Best Practice webinar in the year 2026. As you can see, this is our 11th edition, and today we will discuss the topic applying the DTSP Safe Framework to hosting registries and registrars from compliance to operational maturity. And for this, we have two excellent speakers with us. So with us is Fazaneh. She's the head of outreach and engagement at the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership, and David Sullivan, who's the executive director. And last but not least, Thomas Rickert. He's the director of the Names and Numbers Forum Working Group at the ECO Association, and he will introduce you to the general topic. Before we dive into substance, I would like to make you familiar with our housekeeping rules. So this is a webinar, so of course this will be recorded, and the recording will be available shortly after the meeting. You're muted throughout the webinar, but of course we would like to have this as interactive as possible, so you can ask questions by submitting your questions via the GoToWebinar questions pod. So we have this dashboard of GoToWebinar, and on the right hand side you have the questions pod. Of course, you can also raise your hand and submit your question verbally. We will unmute you. Please state your name and affiliation before you ask a question, and then we are happy to discuss whatever you like with you. After the webinar, you will see a quick survey, which is always a good opportunity to provide feedback. If you like the webinar, what we can improve and what other topics you would like to see being discussed in the future. So your feedback is much appreciated, and this being a webinar of ECO's topDNS initiative. So topDNS is an initiative that was launched in 2021 under the theme of fighting DNS abuse. And here you can see the sponsors of the initiative. And we also have a list of supporters that we are closely working with. And of course, the supporters and sponsors meet on a regular basis in the steering committee. So you can see some familiar faces, at least from the domain industry. And if you think that this is a cool club that you would like to join, please feel free to ping Thomas and or me, or send us a message through the chat if you would like to learn more. Or go to the topDNS website where you can see what we are working on. So one of our main topics is to educate. So we have regular webinars at industry events like Nordic Domain Days, for example, or also in the past at ICANN meetings and at CloudFest or in other industry fora, and where we discuss what it means to fight DNS abuse, what might be the implications, especially when we discuss takedowns or blocking domain names, and what are the issues that come along with it. And if you'd like to learn more, take a look at our website. We also publish on a monthly basis abuse reports for hosting providers, because if you are maybe familiar with the domain name industry, there's also the NetBeacon Institute that we are working very closely with. They have monthly reports on abuse for registries and registrars, and we complete the picture of the industry by covering the hosting industry. And if you would like to be engaged at future webinars or events that we are attending, so on the 26th of February, we will have another webinar on the NIS2 directive implementation in the domain industry. So if you are interested in this, make sure going to our website and sign up for that webinar as well. On the 18th of March, we will do a summary of the upcoming ICANN meeting. So in collaboration with ICANN.org, for already 5 years, we provide regular updates after each ICANN meeting and provide a snapshot of what has been taken place. And on the 26th of May, we will be for the 5th time in a row the host of the abuse workshop at Nordic Domain Days in Stockholm. If you would like to stay updated, please feel free to subscribe to our free newsletters, which is also available for non-members. So this was the advertising block. Now dive into substance. And with this, I would like to hand over to Thomas.
Thank you so much, Lars. Welcome, Fazane and David. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Now, the mere fact that you are in this webinar today means that you do care and that you are interested about what the DTSP is doing. But maybe to give you a little bit of context, this is something that's also relevant with respect to the Digital Services Act. Now, you might say, I'm not based in Europe, so why should I care? But as you may or may not know, even the Digital Services Act has an extraterritorial reach. So companies that are offering their services to the European internal market do need to look into this to check whether they are in or outside scope. One of the requirements of the DSA is transparency reporting. And those of you who have attended the webinar that we did a couple of months back to refresh your memory on or introduce you to the requirements of the DSA will remember that there are transparency reporting requirements, and these transparency reporting requirements cause a lot of headaches for the companies concerned because the reporting is pretty complex. At the moment, the European Commission is offering a reporting template which is overwhelming for some companies, and also some feel that there are inconsistencies and that there are requests to provide information where certain types of intermediaries simply can't provide information. For example, if you shall report on content moderation, but if you are a registry operator, for example, there's no way for you to engage in content moderation because you don't have access at that level to content. Now, having said that, ECO is working on improving and facilitating the reporting requirements with the European Commission. So please do watch out for our activities in that regard. But all these things can't be done overnight. And even if we did find a solution that makes it easier for European players, companies that are working at the global level are interested in having global standards for transparency reporting, and not only to fulfill the legal obligation, but we want the transparency reporting, if companies are putting resources into it, to be meaningful, and so that we can actually compare trends in various jurisdictions, certain attack vectors, or movements in terms of targeted victims and criminal campaigns. But in order to do that, it would be desirable to have a global language that we can speak when we're talking about different types of content and abuse scenarios. And that's exactly where Fazane and David's work comes into play. This is something that we can not operationalize overnight, but they have actually come up with a standard that would facilitate transparency reporting at the global level in a standardized way. And we are more than happy to have them join our webinar today to talk about their work. And maybe we can jointly then take the work products of what they've achieved and help educate lawmakers and other concerned stakeholders so that we can maybe in the middle or long term come to a scenario where reporting is following common standards that have been agreed upon and are easier for companies to manage. So without any further ado, if I'm not mistaken, Fazane is going to take the first stab at this and then hand over to David. No, it's the other way around. It's just two speakers and I still mess it up. I do apologize for that. David, the floor is yours.
David, please unmute yourself.
Of course, I somehow failed. Thank you, Thomas and Lars. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm David Sullivan from the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership. We're thrilled to be with you today to talk about this topic, share some of our work, and receive your feedback, hear your questions, and learn how we can potentially work together to try to advance common international standards that work across the stack. That are proportionate to the needs and responsibilities of different players in the internet ecosystem, but that help us all align with the goal of safer services overall. Today, we have a number of things we want to get through, but we want to first just introduce the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership and the work that we do. I'll hand over to Farzana for that. Present the international standard that's based on our SAFE framework, ISO IEC 25389, talk about how that standard was developed, how it may be useful to players across from hosting to DNS registrars, registries, and other players in the internet infrastructure sectors, and to sort of help these standards help you in your work, as well as talk about how you can help build international standards that will work for you. And to Thomas's point, I think provide a way of organizing and defining terms, approaches, and techniques that will interoperate with the types of regulatory requirements and pressure from governments we're seeing from all around the world, while recognizing your particular roles. So with that, I think I can hand over to Farzana to say a few words. She can introduce herself and say a few words about DTSP.
Thank you, David. Hi, everybody. I am Farzana Badi. I'm the head of outreach and engagement at Digital Trust and Safety Partnership. But some of you might have seen me in different hats. I come from civil society space, and I do outreach and engagement with different communities for DTSP. So I believe that in an open internet, open and global internet. And I think that, and I was raised by this standards community, and best practices community, that they advocated for keeping the internet global and keeping people connected through standards and best practices that can apply to internet services globally, and we can provide those services without to everybody, without considering their gender, ethnicity, nationality. But that ambition came to fruition. But there is another side of the problem, which is, okay, so when we connect people, how can we keep them safe? And how can we provide those safety mechanisms to everyone now that we provide the internet to everyone in the world? And I think that coming from that standards background, I think that one of the ways to do that is to standardize our safety practices as well, so that the service providers do not face fragmented practices that or laws that they have to abide by. So this is how, after that complicated speech, this is why I'm advocating for Digital Trust and Safety Partnership framework, which is first of its kind initiative that promotes this idea of safety, standardizing safety for a more trustworthy and global internet. It was launched in 2021, and it develops practices and promotes industry best practices, has assessment methods and standards, and the approach is very similar to development of cybersecurity standards, like we see at NIST or ISO 27001, etc. And our members, so the partners that got together and came up with a safe framework and initiated DTSP, and we have partners and we have members here. You see it on this slide. And yeah, and now I pass it on to David to give us a quick introduction to international standards.
Thanks, Farzana. And I would just point out that many of you may look at our list of current partners and say, oh, there's a lot of social media here. There's a lot of content. Isn't this something about content moderation? But the fact is, you also have players from internet infrastructure, from cloud, and you will find nowhere in our standard, which is available through the QR code that's at the top of all of these slides. We can also post a link to that in the chat, where you see anything about content moderation. And we'll talk more about the framework and what it means, but it's really one that applies across the board. So before we get into that, we did want to provide a quick background on international standards and how our framework has become an ISO standard, why that matters, and why I think ISO standards for safety in the digital realm are a long overdue, important contribution to the conversations we've been having at many different levels, across many different venues, in many different jurisdictions around the world about how to keep services online safer and prevent abuse. So why do we have international standards? Ultimately, this is about trying to improve quality and reducing the fragmentation of all sorts of products and services and systems around the world. This helps to facilitate international trade. ISO standards actually have special recognition by the WTO. And just about anything can be standardized. We think about this often in terms of physical products or management systems like information security or privacy management systems. These standards are also used in government regulation and in procurement. Folks may know that at least, I think, 14 countries around the world at present and the European Union either mandate or recommend the use of ISO IEC 27001, that management system standard for information security. So you can see how standards in this space can help to prevent the kind of regulatory fragmentation, I think, that concerns everyone, especially smaller players operating globally, trying to deal with potentially conflicting requirements across jurisdictions. Oh, I should say, sorry, that, you know, while standards are good, they come with some challenges as well. And in many cases, they can be very expensive to access, as everyone has to pay ISO. They're, you know, a couple hundred Swiss francs per individual end user license to access standards. They're also not that easy to contribute to because for the most part, the development of international standards is done through national standards bodies, and access to those bodies and access to those processes is not as open as some of the standards that we think of in the internet world, whether that's IETF or other sort of standard setting consortia. When it comes to standards and safety, there's an important history here that goes back more than a century, in particular to the United States, where I'm based. In Baltimore in 1904, there was a fire there, and it was the first time that fire departments from other parts of the United States were able to put their equipment on railroads in order to come to Baltimore and respond to that fire. Unfortunately, when they got to Baltimore, they found that their hoses did not connect to the water hydrants in Baltimore. So they were unable to actually help and had to just watch as much of Baltimore burned. This led to efforts to create standards around fire safety and other safety efforts, first in the United States and then internationally. And that these are the processes that we still use for things like fire safety and workplace safety today. There are a number of organizations. If this is repetitive or basic, please bear with us, but I think it's often useful just to go over the sort of ground basic concepts and definitions, because there are a lot of acronyms. It's kind of an alphabet soup when it comes to standards. But you have ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, that is the kind of UN of standards, that bringing together those national standards bodies. The International Electrotechnical Commission produces electrical and electronic standards. And for information technology, all standards are usually joint ISO and IEC standards, hence the ISO/IEC at the front of so many standards for information technology. In Europe, there are sort of mirror regional organizations, CEN and CENELEC, for ISO and IEC accordingly, developing regional standards. But those function in much the same way as ISO and IEC, where you have technical committees that bring together experts from national bodies to create international standards. And as I mentioned, when it comes to information technology standards, there is a joint technical committee, Joint Technical Committee 1 of ISO and IEC, that goes by the acronym JTC1, which is the umbrella body for all information technology standards at the international level. So this alphabet soup can get quite complicated, but as an example, so there is a body called ISO IEC JTC1 SC27 WG5 that DTSP has been working with on standards for age assurance, which is not something we're going to tackle today, but I think provides just an example of understanding how these systems work. So JTC1 is the umbrella committee. SC27, Subcommittee 27, is the subcommittee of JTC1 responsible for information security and privacy standards. It's where SC 27001 and the other information security standards you may be familiar with are developed. And underneath SC 27 are a number of working groups, including Working Group 5, which is responsible for privacy and identity. And in Working Group 5, the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership has been working with other stakeholders on international standards for age assurance. So that provides just a little bit of a, maybe hopefully a way of deciphering all of the numbers and letters that go into understanding how international standards bodies operate around the world. As I mentioned, so there are many different types of standards. I think it's important to note that not all standards are technical. So you can have standards that are very specific technical specifications and code, but you can also have standards which are essentially frameworks, ways of thinking about problems, ways of thinking about concepts and issues and topics. You can have standards which are pure vocabularies that just help us to define terminology and to speak the same language when we're talking about a specific issue or area. You have standards that contain requirements that have phrases that say an organization shall do X or Y. And you have standards that contain guidance, recommendations, where an organization should do X or Y. I'll talk a little bit in a little bit about why the DTSP standard ISO IEC 25389 is a guidance only standard at this stage. It is not something that you can be certified as compliant with, but provides a way for having organizations from all around the world to align around a common way of approaching problems and issues. Just about anything can be standardized, and then assessing whether one conforms with a standard, that really depends upon having those requirements, which our standard does not have right now. So those are just a couple of bits of information about standards that I hope can help to ground this conversation. So when it comes to the field of trust and safety, really dealing with issues related to unwanted behavior or content on the internet or across different types of digital products and services, there have been some different efforts over the years to try to introduce standards, including some very narrow issue-specific standards around things like consumer reviews online, or age-appropriate design for services for young people, or a technical specification around trustworthiness and safety in the sharing economy. But these have been relatively ad hoc, one-off efforts looking at very specific issues. And what you have not had until now is the kind of broad framework, vocabulary, or management systems, such as the ones for ISO 27000 series, which allow for all of us with different stakes in the global internet community to align around common ways of thinking about how to deal with the kind of behavior we don't want online. So a quick few moments on how the standard came to be. So basically, going back to the 1980s and 1990s, as technology companies were moving very quickly to develop new and particularly open source standards, the processes of ISO and IEC, which can be slow and bureaucratic, were not keeping up with developments and innovation in technology. And companies began creating their own standards consortia to create standards themselves and not have to deal with this international bureaucracy. And so as the ISO and IEC realized they were perhaps losing ground, they recognized that there should be a way for standards developed by other organizations that meet objective criteria around things like cooperativeness and consensus and credibility, to have their standards become recognized as international standards. And they created a process called publicly available specifications, which is the same process that DTSP used to have our framework of best practices and assessments, the Safe Framework, which we're about to get into, voted on by national standards bodies and recognized as an international standard. I'm going to move quickly on this in the interest of time, but if you have questions, please do let us know. So as we mentioned, DTSP launched about 5 years ago with our framework of best practices. We then created a methodology for assessing the maturity of those practices, published a summary report about self-assessments companies did against that framework, and we applied to be a submitter of publicly available specifications in 2023. In 2024, we published our Safe Framework specification, which we'll talk about right now, and submitted that to ISO and IEC for a vote by national standards bodies from all around the world. That vote concluded successfully just about a year ago, and in this past summer, our standard ISO IEC 25389 was published. So that's a quick timeline for how our Safe Framework specification has become an international standard. Now we're going to dive into what that standard actually includes and why it's relevant for you. And to that, I'll pass it back over to Farzana.
Thank you, David. DTSP Best Practice Framework has 5 commitments. And under each commitment, there are several best practices. As I go through this, you can notice that you might be already doing some of these practices, and here's some familiar processes. So the commitments are developing, identifying, evaluating risks during product development. And there's governance, which is adopting explainable processes for product governance. And then there's enforcement, when you have those operations in place for product governance, you have enforcement mechanisms. And then there is product improvement. What have we learned from what has happened? And from our assessments, and how can we improve the processes that associate with risks in general and trust and safety. And then also there is transparency that is a big part of the commitment. So we have like around 35 best practices, and this is stagnant. Of course, they are broad, but practices evolve as industries evolve, and we also undertake outreach to contribute to the evolution of the practices. And so I wanted to make some examples of the best practices and how they can apply to your work. So for example, under development, we have developing insight and analysis capability to understand the pattern of abuse and how your system could get abused, and also how to prevent abuse from happening. And under governance, you create mechanisms to incorporate user community input, or you adopt different policies. And then also there's the improvement, that how you improve your product based on the risk that you consider. And then there's transparency, how you provide notices to the users, and to the domain name registrant, or how you provide how you issue transparency reports on what sort of abusive mechanisms you have used, or what sort of abusive or what you have faced, what challenges you have faced in trust and safety challenges you have faced. We can go to the next slide. So how can this ISO IEC 25389, which is our safe framework, help registries, registrars, and hosting providers? So it has a risk-based approach. Basically, it can be tailored to your own trust and safety program, considering your business model, and also, which very, very importantly, considering what sort of infrastructure services you are providing, because some don't get involved with content moderation, some don't get involved with because they're not social media platforms. So the framework is risk-based, so it can be tailored to the services that you're providing, and also you can focus on high risk areas. You can assess and see what is very high risk. For example, you can decide that, okay, so abuse at domain name registration level could be the highest risk. And these are just examples. I'm not. And also, it can bring regulatory alignment. Frameworks align. The framework align with different regulatory expectations. For intermediary service providers, it doesn't. It maps and aligns, but it also complements and goes further. Also, it is not just one regulation. It's not regulation specific. So it can be applied globally, and also you can demonstrate due diligence and proportionate responses, that is very important for infrastructure providers, because we all care about not removing people from the internet and providing them with infrastructure service, and whatever we do with regards to safety, it should be proportional, and it should not put people's online presence at risk. And then, of course, you can benchmark against internationally recognized practices. You can you can say that these are the best practices that have been standardized. And the next slide, I think. So this is so, for example, for development, you can build easy access, user-friendly mechanisms for submitting abuse notices, and you can also have structured, substantive responses to the abuse notices. You can have you can document procedures. You can have enforcement. You can process notices to identify illegality without illegality, and also disclose use of automated means in notice processes and decision making. So these are just practices that they're not just far from what you're already doing, but they can help you with kind of a benchmarking. And also there's, of course, transparency, for example, notifying submitters of decisions, and available redress mechanisms that are very important for online presence as well. And so I just wanted to mention here that you see that, for example, that these practices, when you look at the DSA, you see some kind of like similarity and alignment. But but the practices go beyond just like a specific regulation. They can be applied globally, and also, as we know, regulators learn from each other. But there is like the cohesion that we can bring to the regulator and the practices that we can bring by using this standard can also prevent that kind of like fragmentation that we can see in providing services globally. And
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to finish the?
No, that's it. Go ahead.
Sorry. Just yeah, I think the point here. So our framework predates the adoption of the major kind of internet safety regulations, whether it's the Digital Services Act, UK Online Safety Act, Singapore, Australia's Online Safety Acts. What it does is provide an organized way of building out the practices that you use to address abuse, to address what we call content and conduct related risks. It helps you define what is, sort of illegal in the context of your operation, and figure out the practices you can use to both comply with regulation, but also sort of to present a framework of operations that is operationally mature. These practices we've articulated are at the bullet point length. They are neither exclusive nor exhaustive. The idea is that companies may have other practices to fulfill those 5 overarching commitments that are not represented here, and we want this standard to evolve and capture and allow for that. So this is a living framework. It's not one that's just going to sit on the shelf. But where the framework goes beyond just saying, okay, here's some bullet points, we think we do these things, is the assessment methodology. That's sort of part 2 of this. So we have an assessment methodology to evaluate the maturity of the practices that companies are using across our framework. It has 2 parts. There is a tailoring approach, which is really about making sure we're not asking a small hosting provider to do the same kind of assessment that a major cloud provider, for example, would be doing. And so we do that by looking at organizational size and scale, as well as kind of product impact and risk factors in order to determine whether you do sort of a low, medium, or high level of assessment. And then those assessments sort of use the same steps, but with more depth, depending on the level of assessment, to evaluate, sort of what practices are you using, what are the risks to those practices, what kind of maturity are your practices at, what type of controls are you using, are you testing your controls for design and operational effectiveness, and being able to report on that internally within your organization to understand how you can improve over time. I'm going to move quickly on these slides in the interest of time, but I just want to really highlight the point that these 2 parts of the standard, the best practices framework and the assessment methodology, work together. They help you understand what practices you're using and then what level of maturity are they operating at. So as I mentioned, to make sure that we are proportionate and we use this tailoring framework. So we look at size and scale in terms of things like number of people, annual revenue, and then we look at quantitative factors around digital service impact, so user volume, as well as a questionnaire of yes/no answers that give a sense of your risk profile. We combine those things and use those to figure out what level of assessment you should do, and then you can adjust that based on other factors. Have you recently entered a new market? Are there some other signals of a need for enhanced risk? So that's our approach to tailoring and to making sure that this is a proportionate framework that can work for small startups as well as for enterprise companies, and one that can grow with companies as they grow. These assessments of methodology, they look at people, process, and technology across those 5 commitments. Are you designing your products with safety in mind? Do you have product governance that is explainable and articulated? Are you enforcing that product governance appropriately? Continuously improving by learning over time and being transparent. And we do these assessments with a sort of 5-stepped process outlined here. Again, I'm not going to go into detail on this right now in the interest of time, but happy to answer questions about it. You have the link that's been shared by Eco in the chat, as well as the link through the QR code to look at this in more detail. What does this mean that this has become an ISO standard? So first, as I mentioned, this framework went for a vote that was definitively approved by national standards bodies from all around the world last year. So this is something that international, it's not just the work of our consortium of internet service providers, but it's something that has been approved by national standards bodies working on information technology globally. The terms and definitions that are in our standard have also been added to the ISO database of terms and definitions, so they can be used in the development of other standards and help to ensure that we all speak with a common language. Because the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership makes our SAFE framework available for free with no charge on our website, ISO and IEC do the same. So this is one of relatively few international standards that is available at no cost to you. And our organization is responsible for the maintenance and review of this standard. So at least every 5 years, we need to do a sort of systematic review of the standard. We're planning to do that sooner rather than later, because there's been a lot of changes in the world of online safety since we initially published our best practices 5 years ago. And so we will be looking for stakeholder engagement and public input to inform review, update, and evolution of this standard, including a process that will be kicking off sort of later this year. So, what this can do, you can benchmark your own activities and programs here using this standard. You can bring this standard to your management to inform and educate the C-suite and senior management about what trust and safety practices, which are not about content moderation and particular pieces of content, but about having the practices you can use to prevent and respond to abuse as it manifests in your activities, in your business model, in your services, and to be able to invest in those things and improve and raise practices overall. This is something that has been incorporated into compliance programs for online safety regulation, including by very large online platforms. But I think hopefully, as we've illustrated today, these practices are just as applicable to other internet intermediaries who are dealing with sort of the baseline requirements of laws like the Digital Services Act, whether that is the requirements around terms and conditions, the requirements around handling takedown orders, or the requirements around transparency. And then finally, and this is where I think partnerships with organizations like ECO are really powerful, and we hope to continue this, is to engage policymakers, regulators, and other stakeholders to really educate them about what this looks like across the stack and the proportionate roles of different providers.
David, may I jump in quickly to address one question that I've received through the questions part. So there's Claire Milne from Antelope.org UK, who's coming back to one aspect that you mentioned earlier. And her question is, don't end users of services from smaller providers to deserve the similar level of safety even if fewer people are involved?
Yeah, well, I think one of the important things here, which I think is different from how we do this, compared to how some of the regulations that have been enacted in different places around the world, is that it's not just about the size of the service. So, if you look at something like the Digital Services Act as an example, right, the organizations that have the largest level of responsibility are those with 45 million users in the EU or more. That is one way of looking at sort of scale and risk. But it does, I think, present an issue when smaller services might have a higher level of risk just because of the nature of the service they provide or other factors. So that's why we look at these two different areas of both the sort of size and scale of the organization, the user volume, but also kind of the risk factors that different products or services present in order to determine kind of what level of assessment a company should be doing. So I think it's a really good point, and it's one that we hope that our framework does address. There's always room for improvement, so I think we really welcome feedback in terms of how we can do better at kind of making sure that we capture that element. But you know, the notion that smaller services are inherently safer than larger services is, I think, one that is not borne out by what we've seen around the world when it comes to seeing how different types of abuse manifest online and across the internet, and one that we need to be careful about.
Thank you, David. I've got one more question, but I think it's perfect to start the Q&A at the end, so I will save that for later. So please go ahead.
All right, let me just, I think we've covered a lot of some of these later slides, so we can come back to them if necessary. I think Farzana spoke eloquently to the idea that if you have a voluntary set of best practices that have been standardized internationally about how companies can address abuse online, that helps to keep people connected. It helps prevent the types of overbroad and disproportionate actions that governments, I think, or different stakeholders are sort of constantly pushing services to engage in. It provides a way of saying, no, this is how we organize what we do, and this is how we ensure safety, and helps to, I think, support the type of global interoperability and growth that the internet is all about. So I'm going to push through these to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. Just one thing, maybe a quick advertisement before we do. So we welcome organizations becoming involved in our work and becoming part of our partnership. So we have membership in the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership is organized much like other standard setting organizations. Our general membership criteria is that you operate some sort of product or service for which you are conducting trust and safety operations, for which you are engaging in practices to prevent content or conduct related abuse, and you support the purpose of our partnership. So if you're interested in learning more about membership, please do. We have also created a new tier of membership, which may also be of interest to this community, called affiliate membership. So we recognize that not all organizations might be ready in terms of kind of resources and maturity to become part of this kind of partnership and contribute to the shaping of these practices, but may wish nonetheless to access the kind of resources that can help you take advantage of this framework and sort of join the community. So we've created something called affiliate membership. It provides access to some non-public resources that help to implement the framework and provide opportunities for engagement and networking and consultation. And this affiliate membership is open both to organizations that are otherwise eligible to join DTSP, as well as organizations who are broader and may have just some work that they do that touches upon trust and safety. So if you fall into either of those categories and are interested in learning more, please do reach out, and I will share a link in the chat to a document with a little bit more information about that. But with that, I think we can probably, we'll stop there, and then we can open it up to questions.
Okay. First of all, David, thank you very much for the presentation. Also, thank you very much, Farzana. There's a follow-up question on the small providers that we just addressed, and let's pick it up. So the answer is, thanks for the reply, but for the same type of service with given risk levels, wouldn't your approach give smaller providers an easier ride?
So it's a good question. I think that if you look at how we've structured the assessment methodology, and I'll try to answer this verbally without resorting to slides. Really, the idea is not that you're giving smaller providers an easier ride, but that you're recognizing that smaller providers have different levels of resourcing, and we should be conscious of that, while also expecting them to adhere to the fundamental commitments and framework that they're signing up to here. Smaller players won't have the same number of people or number of resources they can throw at doing sophisticated risk assessments or audits or what have you. But the way that our framework works is that even the smallest providers, right, should be identifying what are the practices that they're using to address different types of content and behavior that they don't want. How have they articulated these things in terms of governance? What kind of enforcement are they doing? What are the risks to those things? And what is the sort of level of maturity of those practices? That's not a insubstantial task, but how smaller providers can do that through the sort of level one sort of lighter weight assessments, I think is just more realistic and manageable. And then those responsibilities can grow over time. So if a smaller provider sees a sudden upsurge in number of users, they might realize, hey, we need to get ahead of this. We need to get ahead of this before regulators or law enforcement or whoever comes knocking, and they can sort of use the more sophisticated elements of our assessment approach in order to be prepared. So that's also, I think, something that's important to remember is like, this is not a, again, this is all recommendations. This is guidance. This is a tool in the toolkit. You can always choose to use more of the sophisticated parts if using that risk-based approach. Farzana, I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add to or take away from that answer before we move on.
I think that was a very good question. I just wanted to add that sometimes smaller providers, the choice is between doing something and not doing something. And in order to encourage them, these best practices could help them to do like lightweight transparency reporting. Because otherwise, especially where they're not regulated, they will opt for not doing it because they don't have the resources to do it easily, and they don't have the benchmarks. So it kind of incentivizes them as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I have another one. So I wouldn't mind if we can move on also and taking a look at the time. So the next question is, and this is what the question that I saved from earlier on is, and I think it's a very valid question because you also described the landscape of different standards that are out there. And the question is, was there an effort to incorporate this into ISO 27001 as they would complement each other, or maybe not? And maybe not have to jump through initial hoops to make to maturity. Forgive my ignorance here. I'm new to standards and accreditation space.
So that is a great question. So I think that it's something we're actually looking at quite a bit right now within DTSP. So, we deliberately made a decision, especially sort of presenting for the first time a proposed international standard around user-generated sort of content and behavior, to have this be guidance, not requirements, not something that can be certified against. However, I do think there is a world where this could be a kind of additional attachment, essentially, to an information security management system that would be certified under ISO 27001. Similarly, I think it could potentially be attached to a AI management system under ISO 42001. So we're open to and sort of currently exploring, and we're actually looking for some help. So if there are consultants on this call, or people know of them who are familiar with those kinds of conformity assessment practices, who might be interested in doing a little work to help us figure this out, please let us know. But I think we're looking to see how can this be bolted on. I think on the one hand, right, there is a kind of firm distinction between the challenges in information security about people breaking systems, sort of about getting, accessing systems they should not be able to access, and doing things with them they should not be able to. And the challenges around behavior or content, which is about using a digital service kind of technically as it's intended to be used against the governance of that service in order to cause harm, whether it's illegal or just against the terms and conditions. In practice, these things blur together. I think this is well understood in the DNS world, right? Where DNS abuse is on the one hand, oh yeah, these are just these, technical issues over here. And then it becomes about every issue where there's illegal content, illegal behavior, and that tension is constantly there. Farzana, you know this stuff better than me, so feel free to jump in if you want to say more on that topic.
No, it was great. I mean, so at the framework is content and conduct agnostic, so it can be applied to how to deal with different abuses, and down the line, how it can be, it could be technical abuse as well. So alignment with the security ISO could well happen.
The other thing there, just to add briefly, is that in security and in privacy, these are areas where the much more mature international standards and where there are controls that have been set out in ISO standards and in other standards and frameworks. In the space of trust and safety, content and behavior, we don't have controls that have been sort of published, and we don't have that same level. Our methodology helps companies to identify the controls they're using and test those controls, but we haven't published, a control library, and that's where we don't have the same level of maturity, and where I think more work is going to be necessary in the years to come as part of this journey that Thomas referred to back at the beginning.
Thank you very much. I know we have to be mindful about the time, but I know Thomas has one final question.
Exactly, but it's great that we had so much audience participation today. My question for you is whether I know it's early days, whether there is interest by threat intelligence providers or companies offering software solutions for companies to manage their abuse, either proactively or reactively, to incorporate your standard, because that would certainly make the implementation part much easier for the companies concerned.
Thanks, Thomas. So on the one hand, as I mentioned, our membership criteria to be a member of DTSP, to participate in our working groups and committees, is that you have to operate a service for which you're doing trust and safety, which excludes kind of companies who are vendors providing different types of services. The affiliate membership that I mentioned is a chance for those kinds of organizations to align with what we're doing, to use some of the tools and resources we've developed, and to sort of start a discussion. I think there's much more work to be done in the future, and we'll be consulting with those kinds of groups as we build out these practices and as we evolve this standard in the future.
Thank you so much. Lars, let me just double check whether there are any new questions in the questions part.
No, we don't have any new questions. The very final one is if we will circulate the slides together with a recording after the webinar. I think that is something that we can do. And no, Thomas, no further questions.
Shall I take us home? All right.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I think there's nothing more for me to say, but thank you to Farzaneh and David for the excellent presentation. I hope that you have solicited some interest from membership, not only to participate themselves, but also to spread the word, because I think that's the aim of this, that we're looking for folks that act as multipliers to spread the word about the good work that you're doing. So thank you so much again, and thanks to Lars and his team for organizing this and making sure that everything runs so smoothly technically. Thanks to all of you for joining today, and with this, the meeting is adjourned.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
I see participant emojis anyway. It was great. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.